Howdy everyone, Greg Martin, the Entrepreneur's Banker here. And I'd like to tell you a story about two amazing entrepreneurs that I've talked with in the last couple months. Both of these entrepreneurs, one's a service-based company, one is a product-based company, have potential for 2021 to be the best year ever. And a lot of the reason for that is because they have built some really strong capabilities and developed some efficiencies in their operations in 2020 in order to allow them to go after some larger projects and to be able to, in one case, actually jump into a completely different geographic area, but they've laid the foundations to be able to succeed. And the conversation I've had with both companies, both entrepreneurs, is how is this going to impact my working capital? You'll recall that working capital is the fuel that the engine of your company needs in order to run. And it's by running that it actually produces more cash, more revenue, more net income that can either be used to fuel perpetual growth or taken out as the owner, because, let's face it, as the entrepreneur, you're the one that's taking all of the risk, so you deserve to be compensated for that. But understanding the working capital, your working capital cycle, and your working capital need, specifically when it comes time to plan growth and managerial decisions, is so critical. And so today I want to walk through a couple ways that we can look at each one of those scenarios differently. We're going to look at one scenario where we say, okay, we're going to remain as efficient as we are, but we're going to grow. And what does that impact on my working capital need? Then we're going to say, okay, well, let's assume that that we're going to stay the same, but we're going to make some managerial changes. Maybe we've got customers that are pushing back on the terms that we have, whether that be cash on delivery or net 30 days. Maybe they're starting to say, okay, look, you need to provide us net 60, net 90, net 120 days. And so your accounts receivable is going to be prolonged, but that means that you're going to get your cash, but you're going to have extra working capital on hand in order to sustain the business during the time that you're used to getting in net 30, and now you're getting it in net 90. And then the third scenario that we're going to look at is combining the two of those, because very rarely does one company ever have growth without having to impact or change managerial decisions. Sometimes when I talk to entrepreneurs who are in this situation, typically they come to me and they're saying, okay, Greg, I need to increase my line of credit. And I say, okay, that's great. As the business is growing, that is an effective tool to be able to use short-term borrowings in order to help fill a working capital need. But talk to me a little bit more about what's going on. Tell me what's going on. Talk to me about the growth. How much more of a line of credit do you need? And quite frankly, it is the gut of the entrepreneur that answers that question. What I mean is that entrepreneurs who understand their business so intimately that they know, and deep down in their gut, that something's either going really good or something needs to be changed in their business. And so their gut tells me, oh, Greg, I just need another $200,000. Well, and we'll work through that, and I'll strive to get that. But I always come back and I always ask them, okay, well, why is it $200,000? How do you know it's going to be $200,000? Is that going to be enough? Because if you ask for $200,000 when you really need an extra $300,000 or $400,000, then that's a big difference. And then also, if you ask for $200,000, but you only really need $50,000, well, then it's a matter of saying, okay, well, how do we justify and how do we talk to the bank about displaying the need for this working capital and defining the working capital needs? So we're going to talk about that today. And the first thing we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about really just looking at just the growth of your company and then the impact on your working capital and your working capital need. But before we jump into that, if you have not received the working capital workbook that I designed specifically to help with this working capital lesson, then please send me an email at greg@theentrepreneurbanker.com, and I'll be sure to send it to you. The workbook also includes all the templates and all the formats, as well as a couple sheets that you can use to take notes as you're going through this for this lesson as well as the previous ones. So again, if you haven't connected with me, please connect with me. Please like this video and send me an email so that I can put this in your hands and make this the time that we're spending together even more impactful and powerful. So here we are looking at Grow Corporation, and we're going to start by looking at specifically at the projected growth. So you can see here that I've got a sample balance sheet and a sample income statement. And you'll notice over here, again, let's just run really quickly through the way that it is right now. So your current assets, which is made up of your cash, accounts receivable, and your inventory, is $270,000. Your current liabilities, which is only your accounts payable, is $135,000. So you have a working capital of $135,000. Again, working capital is calculated simply by taking your current assets minus your current liabilities. Their current ratio is 2.0, or this is the ratio where instead of subtracting current assets to current liabilities, we actually divide current assets divided by current liabilities. And in having that 2.0 as a current ratio is just a really good rule of thumb, and that's going to help us as we're talking about this today. So again, understanding that your current ratio, current assets over current liabilities, being at 2.0 is super, super critical. Another way to look at this, if you recall, is that your current ratio is to say, okay, how much more current assets do I have? Or I have twice as many current assets as I do current liabilities. So that's really good to know. But then let's talk about your working capital cycle and your working capital need. And I'm really just going to jump down real quick, and we're going to talk about the modified working capital analysis, because I think that is the more realistic way of entrepreneurs looking at their working capital and understanding. And so it's broken down, if you'll recall, into the 3 periods. And we went into a lot of detail for all of these last week's lesson. So if you haven't checked out last week's lesson, please be sure to do that. In order to determine the working capital needed, we take the inventory days on hand, add it to the accounts receivable days on hand, and then subtract the accounts payable days on hand. And overall, we come up to almost a half a day that needs to be financed. And so great, so we've got half a day that needs to be financed, but how much does it actually cost to run your business for a half a day? Well, that's really easy to figure out. You simply take your cost of goods sold and your net operating expenses, and you divide that by 365, and then you multiply that times the 0.44. And so that gives you a working capital need of $4,000. So based upon this analysis, as it sits right now, Grow Corporation is in a really, really good spot because they've got plenty of current assets. So they've got a lot of cash that they can fund that need of $4,000. But what happens if they have 40% growth? So that's what we've got here. Imagine, if you will, you are sitting there and you're talking with the leaders of Grow Corporation, and you're saying, okay, so where is your next year going to be? All right, let's assume that we keep right now that our balance sheet and our income statement, our balance sheet is going to stay the same as far as we're able to have the same level of responsibility of communication and deals with our suppliers, and we're able to extend the same amount of terms that we've got with our customers. Really just looking at saying, okay, if we're going to grow, and let's say that we're going to grow by 40%. So we're going to have our sales be, last year they were 3.8, and we think that we're going to gross that to almost $5.3 million. And then we say, okay, that's great, but we also have, obviously our cost of goods sold is gonna have to grow as well, because we're buying more inventory, we're spending more money paying our employees in order to convert whatever it is we do. So our cost of goods, and let's say that maybe it's a little bit less efficient, so say that our cost of goods actually grows a little bit faster than our sales. So our sales grew by 40%, but let's say that our cost of goods sold, that cost actually grows by 44%. So one thing I would say, okay, that's something that you need to look at and to say, okay, well, there's obviously some inefficiencies going on with your operations within that cost of goods sold. Maybe it's inefficiencies that you can control. Maybe it's not. Maybe your raw material costs just go up. And that's something you really can impact, but something that you have to be aware of and you have to try to plan. And so let's just, again, with this example, let's say that your cost of goods sold expenses go up 44%. But let's say that overall you've got a really, really good company and you think that operationally speaking, that you can find some efficiencies. So while your top line goes up 40%, and your cost of goods goes up a little bit more than that, you find a whole lot of efficiency. So your operating expenses are only going to go up, maybe 8% compared to last year. So you were at 732,000, but now you're at 790,000. So what does this actually mean from a working capital standpoint? Okay, now before we kind of jump back in and start looking at some of the calculations, let's assume that you don't have accrual-based statements. Let's say that all your financial reports are based upon cash basis. In other words, you don't track your accounts receivable, you don't track your accounts payable. A good way of determining what you need in order to grow your working capital is by simply going back to that current ratio. Remember, in Growth Corporation, they were in a really good position and they had a 2.0 current ratio, meaning current assets over current liabilities equals 2.0. So if that were the case, we would say, okay, our current ratio is 2.0, and that also translates into $135,000 of working capital. In order to determine how much we would have to grow our working capital, we would just simply take that $135,000 and multiply it by 1.4, or representing the 40% growth. So what we would do is we simply take the $135,000 times 1.4, and that tells us that the working capital that you would need in order to maintain that 2.0 current ratio is $189,000, or $54,000 of additional working capital. So if you're in a situation that you're having to either raise money, or maybe have to inject money into the business, or go to a bank and ask for an increase on the line of credit, well, that's how you can define, hey, I need to get to, I need an additional $54,000. So I need to increase my line of credit from $200,000 to $254,000 in order to support this growth. But if you have the accrual-based financial statements, then you can really plug some numbers in and you can make it even more granular and make it even more exciting. Let's take a look at this projected growth. And again, I'm going to focus on the modified working capital analysis. So we can see here that historically speaking, that the working capital need was 0.44, and they only needed $4,000 of working capital need. And you might say, okay, Greg, well, I understand that, but based on this, that just doesn't make sense. That we've got, we're growing by 40%, but you're telling me that the modified working capital need actually goes down? Well, yeah, I am. And let's walk through this real quick and let's see where it is. And then we can, let's play around and let's look at some different numbers. So let's assume, again, so our inventory, we're going to assume that our inventories stay the same. And our inventory divided by the sum of the projected cost of goods sold, the sum of the operating expenses, then multiplied by 365, gives us our inventory days on hand of 5.39. Our AR days on hand is going to be the accounts receivable divided by our new projected sales, multiplied by 365, and that's 5.19. And then the accounts payable is simply the the 135,000 of accounts payable, and divide that by the sum of the cost of goods and the operating expenses times 365. So all that's said and done is that our total working capital need is going to only be AR plus, inventory plus AR minus AP equals 0.19 days on hand. And that's great. So we really don't need a whole lot. But we have one major assumption in here, and that's that operating expense. So we're saying that we are going to grow our total sales by 40%, but we're only going to grow our operating expenses by 8%. That's huge amounts of efficiency. So let's just kind of lock this, and let's just say, okay, I don't know if that's necessarily the case. I mean, through some scale, you might be able to find some of that efficiency, but to have it only grow up by that much isn't a whole lot. Let's assume instead of this going up by 8%, let's say that, and I think that there's definitely a case to be made that you can find some efficiencies, but let's assume that you don't have that much efficiency. Let's say that it goes up by 25%. So last year's operational expenses times 1.25. And so we'll see that increased by 25%. But then we also noticed that the modified working capital need went up quite a bit as well. But you'll notice that this is a really well capitalized company. So you can tell in this need, in the instance of a company being really strong capitalized or having that 2.0 current ratio, that they were able to sustain their growth without having to really take on a significant change to their working capital need. But that was all because they had so much current assets and they had so much working capital that was in the business. But let's really dive in. And now let's take a look at it and let's say, okay, well, what if there are some changes to your balance sheet? And how do the changes in your balance sheet impacted? And stick with me here because we're building on to the third module, which I think is the most important module. Let's take a look at how your working capital cycle, and your working capital need are impacted by changes in the decisions that you, the manager, make. Maybe as you're growing, you're saying, okay, look, I maybe need to hold on to some more inventory because I want to make sure that I have got the ability to meet my customers' expectations. Maybe you're going to be able to go out and get better terms with your suppliers, and so you're able to stretch that payable period out longer, which is good because in essence, then you've got your suppliers acting as the bank, that you don't have to pay for that until it's closer for you getting paid. But then what happens if you have some of your customers come to you and say, hey, those net 30-day terms, it's not going to cut it anymore. If we want to keep doing business, I need to have net 60, net 90, net 120-day terms. So your accounts receivable, you getting that cash is now pushed out further into the future. And so you're going to have working capital, or you're going to have cash in your business to be able to sustain your operations for extra periods of time while your accounts receivable balance goes up, which is a good thing. But that's also saying that you getting that cash in is in the future. So let's actually take a look at an example of how these changes actually impact your working capital and your working capital need. Okay, so here we can say, here's Grow Corporation, and all we're going to do now is we're just going to say we're going to look at the changes in terms. So off the bat, we're going to say, okay, the cash is going to stay the same, but you'll see that our accounts receivable has increased from $75,000 to $225,000. So that's what we talked about. You're having to give longer terms, and so your accounts payable balance is extended and it's bigger. Same thing from this standpoint is that the entrepreneur decided to make sure that they had more inventory on hand. So they went out and they purchased more inventory, which you can also see is in their accounts payable. Now their accounts payable has actually gone up by $270,000, or gone up to $270,000, which is really a good thing. But from the standpoint of saying, okay, how does that impact your working capital cycle? Let's all take a look at it. So we can see here, and again, we're going to be looking and focusing primarily on the modified working capital analysis, that before these changes, this company was really well capitalized, and so that they didn't really have a whole lot of working capital need. But just the small changes of having your accounts receivable balloon up to 225,000, your inventory at 210,000, and your accounts payable, you can see that the working capital need jumped up huge to $147,000. Now, because of they're in a position that where they are, their current ratio and their working capital ratios are still all good, but this really underscores that they need to have the ability to convert, and they're going to need $148,000 in order to continue operations. Okay, where I think that you're going to see a significant change is when we start playing around with some of these inputs. So let's assume that with your accounts payable, let's say that you weren't able to go and to get better terms from your suppliers, and instead of being able to increase that to 270,000, they kept you at the same terms, and so net you still are keeping accounts payable only about $135,000. Look at the impact that has on your working capital need, because that has shrunk down so much. And so then let's also look at, and let's assume that going from 75,000 to 225,000, that's a huge jump. But let's say that you had to push and extend it even further. So let's say that you had to extend terms so that your accounts receivable, while it might be good and it might be with a good company, but that's up to $300,000. So you can see very quickly that there are some impacts on your working capital cycle and your working capital need, and the only thing that you are changing is the managerial decisions that you're making on how much inventory to hold on to, what terms to extend for your accounts receivable, and then how do you negotiate the accounts payable. But let's face it, very rarely will you have growth that impacts your income statement in a vacuum, and very rarely will you have managerial decisions that impact your balance sheet in a vacuum. The reality is that you are part of a vibrant organization that is growing and breathing, and it is feeding off of cash, which is why we need to have the working capital. But it goes in conjunction. When you grow, you may get bigger clients that may push you to extend more terms, or you might have to get a new supplier which you don't have a relationship with, and so your terms actually for payment actually get shrunk until you had built that relationship. So it's really a way of looking at how does both growth and managerial decisions impact how your business is actually going to grow, and then how does that really impact your working capital and your working capital need. Let's take a look at how both of those levers are tweaked and pulled, and I think this is the most meaningful module for a lot of the entrepreneurs that I talk with. Let's take a look at the impact of both growth, which is your income statement, and managerial decisions, which is your balance sheet. So we can see here, just again, setting our baseline, our modified working capital analysis, this company is in a really good position, and they don't really have a whole lot of a working capital need. But we can see here that we are going through, and we are looking at both the changes in the inventory days on hand, accounts receivable days on hand, accounts payable days on hand, all based on your projected balance sheet and your projected income statement. And so you can see that by doing that we're saying, okay, we really understand what's going on and what's happening in our company, but we're going to need a lot more working capital in order to actually sit there and to grow. So let's play around with some of this, and let's just tweak some things a little bit. So let's say that you are able to go and negotiate some terms with your new clients, and or maybe originally you thought they were going to be at net 90, but then after going through and saying, okay, no, we think that we can negotiate a net 60-day term, so you're going to get your receivables, you're going to get your cash in sooner, which is really, really good for you. But with that, it means that your accounts receivable balance is going to go down, which is okay, because again, you're getting that cash in sooner. But let's say it goes down to 175,000. And so you can see that that was a significant impact. It went from $142,000 need to $97,000 need. But then let's say that as you're going through again, let's say that your cost of goods sold, maybe the cost of lumber or the cost of steel or the cost of cotton, whatever it is that you take to actually grow your to do your business, let's say it goes up. You know, we're saying here that it's only going to go up slightly by 4%, but let's say that it actually goes up by, let's say, 15%. And that's for anyone that is in any type of commodity that has that right now, you know that's something that really legitimately could happen. And so let's say that it goes up by 50%. And so you can see how that impacts your working capital need. And we also talked about, you know, being able to find some efficiencies that you have here. You know, maybe you're able to have that, but as you're going through and say, oh no, you know, we're going to have to hire a second shift in order to meet these new orders and everything like that. So I don't think that we're going to be able to hold our increase in operational expenses at 8%. Maybe that increases by 20%. And so you can see again how it all impacts and modify the working capital need. The last thing let's look at is, look at your inventory. Now maybe because you're looking at the different commodity prices and you realize that you have to hold more of the inventory on hand. You've got to put more of your cash into that inventory in order to actually hold on to it so that you don't run out. And let's say that you have to increase that to 300,000. Well, then all of that directly, obviously, you're putting more capital into your business, or you need more capital in your business in order to invest in that inventory. And so your working capital need goes up to $195,000. As you can see, this is a very, very powerful tool when it comes to understanding the impact on your working capital and your working capital need as your business both experiences growth and you are forced as the manager to be able to make decisions on how things are impacted in your balance sheet. You know, your accounts payable, your accounts receivable, your inventory. All of that requires and influences the working capital that you have to have on hand in order to have your business continue to be able to be sustainable and have the current and future operations. But I will say that this model is just like every other model. It's just a pretty Excel spreadsheet. And if you don't understand it, two, if you don't use it, then it really is not that impactful. So what do I recommend? A couple of things. One, you need to know your numbers. If you don't consistently look at your financial statements, I know you probably did not get into business in order to spend time poring over balance sheets and income statements. But I think that this discussion has shown you how your balance sheet and your income statement, how they actually work together and impact your working capital needs. So you need to know your numbers. Two, you need to share these numbers with your Fab Five. Those are the 5 people that you as the entrepreneur surround yourself with that push you towards success. You know, hopefully your banker is worthy of being part of that Fab Five and actually provides good advice and pushes you towards success. But it could be your accountant, maybe a mentor, another entrepreneur, a peer. You know, there's some great peer-to-peer organizations. Entrepreneurs Organization, EO, is just one of the ones that I really spend a lot of time with a lot of their members. And so it's fantastic. Share this information with your Fab Five and get their input, get their understanding, and let them gain their wisdom. And don't just stop sharing this information with your Fab Five. Share it with the key leaders in your business. These are the people that maybe are the head of all the different divisions, or maybe it's your head of maintenance. Definitely your CFO should be, or whoever's helping you with the financials should be part of it. But share it with them and let them understand the impacts that they make out in the field from an operational standpoint, from an efficiency standpoint, how that either helps or hurts your business's ability to be able to continue operations. And then finally, use this as a wake-up call that most businesses out there are undercapitalized. I really, really encourage you to run that current ratio analysis where you take your current assets divided by your current liabilities. And if that number is below 2.0, then develop a plan in order to build cash up in the business, or to be able to build something up in your current assets so that you have a strong capital position. The SBA says that I think like 85% of businesses fail in their first year. And one of the major reasons for that is that they're undercapitalized. But that's just not for startups. It's for every business in the entire life cycle. You have to be well capitalized. Well, that's going to wrap it up for this week, but that's a great lead-in into our fourth and final lesson that we're going to talk about next week. We're actually going to talk about the sources of working capital. We're going to talk about the impacts of your working capital based on a different type of managerial decision, specifically pulling money out of the business. And then we're going to take a deep dive into an understanding of a line of credit, because for a lot of entrepreneurs, even the entrepreneurs that are really well capitalized, they have a line of credit. And that is a mechanism that banks typically offer in order to help with short-term working capital needs. So since that is such a prevalent source of working capital, I want to be able to dive in to help you understand a little bit more about a business line of credit and how it's different than some other line of credits that are out there. I hope that this discussion was immensely valuable to you. It would mean the world to me if you like this video, you leave a comment. If we're not connected, please connect with me on any of the social media platforms and forward this video to an entrepreneur that you think would get a lot of value out of it. If you haven't received the Working Capital Workbook, please send me an email at greg@theentrepreneurbanker.com, and I'd be more than happy to send this to you, and as well as to include you on the distribution list for next week's lesson. Until then, this is Greg Martin, the Entrepreneur's Banker, wishing you peace, success, and happiness. Have a great week.